Hey, what's up? Scott Balkum here from Imagination Creation Films, and today we're going to be talking about macro lenses and macro photography and videography. Yeah, there's a lot of information out there on the interwebs on shooting macro photography and shooting with macro lenses, but there's not a whole lot of explanations as to what you really need to know. A friend of mine recently reached out and asked, how do I shoot this particular shot? He knew it was a macro, but he didn't understand exactly which macro does what and what it all meant. So I gave him the information and I said, you know what? I'll do you one better. I'll make a video. Here we go. We're going to explain all the differences of the various macro lenses and what they actually mean out there in the real world. So what is a macro lens? Well, in short, it's a lens that can focus really, really short. Now, a normal lens, it might have a close focus range of maybe a foot, or maybe some of the telephoto lenses might be 3 feet, or maybe if it's a super wide angle lens, it might have a 6-inch close focus range. A macro lens might go down to, say, 1/2 centimeter or 1/4 inch. You're not only dealing with how close up it is, but the millimeters of the lens itself. So a telephoto lens will effectively bring your subject closer to your camera, and a wide angle lens would make it feel rather far and spacious. So that calculates into a magnification ratio. And quite simply, a magnification ratio is what is the ratio that the real life object appears to the sensor itself. So for example, if this is a fly, it is approximately 3/4 inch square. If I have a lens that has a magnification ratio of 1:1 or 1x, then that means that this sensor with that lens would have this object the exact same size on the sensor that it is in real life. If it had a 0.5 magnification, then that would mean this is only half that size on the actual sensor. Now, in fairness, a macro lens needs to have a ratio of at least 1:1 or 1x magnification to be considered a macro. But in the real world, we don't really care about that. What we care about is, does it achieve the goal that we're looking for? As I talk about each of these lenses, I'm going to pop up an actual photo that I took with the A7R II and the particular lens. And what we're going to use for our macro is this little micro SD card. And more particularly, this little middle section. That's how close we're about to get, because macro photography is pretty cool. So this is the Canon 100mm f2.8 IS-USM macro lens. It has a close focus of about 1 foot, and it has a magnification ratio of 1:1. That means it's a 1x magnification. That means that this fly, which is not a fly, will appear the exact same size on the sensor as it does in real life. Now this is a great, great lens. It's about $750. It is very fast. It's also a great portrait lens, by the way. It's an f2.8 lens, so it's a lot faster than most lenses. Now, this does have IS, that's the image stabilization, and that will help you if you're hand holding your macro shots. It's not going to work in every case, but it might help you with a couple of stops. Here's an example right here. Now, taking a look at this first photo using the 100mm lens. This is simply fit into a 16:9 frame. And now this next photo, this is cropped. So we punched into a 1:1 pixel ratio. So it's only 4K of image, but is a true representation of actual size in 4K. So the next lens we have here is the Canon 24-105 f4 IS-USM. This is the kit lens. And a lot of people don't realize, but the kit lens is also a macro. Now, in fairness, by definition, it's not, because it doesn't have a 1:1 minimum magnification ratio. It's actually a 1:4.3 ratio, which means it's 25%. This will appear 25% of its natural size against the sensor. And the close focus is on this one about 0.95 feet. So it'll get in there pretty close. Now this lens does have image stabilization. It also is an autofocus lens. That 100mm Canon is also an autofocus lens. I forgot to mention that, sorry about that. So this 24-105 will actually do macro. It's just doing it at about a 25% ratio. So let's take a look at the photos on the 24-105. The first image is just fit to frame 16:9. And you can kind of see that it's a lot smaller. And then the next one, we crop it in to a full 4K. And you can still see that it's a lot smaller than the 1:1 ratio of the 100mm. Now the next lens that we have here is the Canon MPE65mm. Now this is an interesting lens because it doesn't work like these others. It does not have focus. This ring right here is actually for its zoom. So it is a macro zoom. That's right there, fully extended. Now this one has an amazing ability of 1:1 magnification at this point, and it goes all the way to 5:1, which means that this fly, which is not really a fly, will be 5 times its size against that sensor. Now that really starts to show some interesting effects. Taking a look at the MPE65 photos, the first one is taken at 5:1, so that's fully extended, and it is just fit to a 16:9 frame. The next photo is cropped in all the way to 4K at 5:1. You can tell there is an extraordinary amount of detail and magnification from that lens. Now, this lens, as I pointed out, does not have focus. So how do you focus a lens that doesn't have a focus? Well, you are the focus. You need a rack focus system. And this is how you focus it. You mount the lens to the rack, you point it at your subject, zoom it in however you need, and then you're going to rack it slowly until it's in focus. Now understand what that means is this does not have a focus range. It is 100% based upon what the magnification factor is. And what it works out to be is it's about here. It's maybe 3 or 4 inches when it's at 1x, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's about that. When it's at 5x, it's about a half an inch. And this is an f2.8 lens, and it lets a lot of light in there, but you need so much more light when you are shooting at 5x. You need a super bright flashlight or the sun to get enough light to the end of this to expose properly when you're at 5x. When you're down here, it's not quite so bad, and you can actually get the light in there. You actually start running into problems when you're at high magnification in that the lens itself will start blocking the light because you're so close to that lens element that you can create a little shroud around it. So this is a tricky lens to use, but you can get some phenomenal results with it. These two lenses, you do not need this, but this is kind of handy because it allows you to make very, very fine adjustments. One thing you need to consider when shooting macro photography, you can't wiggle. At 5x magnification, I put my camera on a 10-second delay because just me pressing the button on the camera, the wiggles that happen by pressing that, it takes about 5 or 6 seconds for that to fully dampen out. Otherwise, it's going to show up as a blurry image. Well, so what are some other options out there? Well, extension tubes. These are pretty inexpensive, and they do a surprisingly good job. Now, these happen to be pass-through, so these will pass the electronic information from the lens back to the camera, and that helps with autofocus and that kind of stuff. Now, understand, everything's going to be a little off. 1 foot focus on this lens with an extension tube is not going to equal 1 foot anymore. It's going to equal like 0.7. So you can take this 24-105, not a 1:1 magnification, add extension tubes to it. That allows you to get a closer focus. When you get a closer focus, you've brought it closer to the object, which means it's going to be larger on the sensor. Now the math will eventually get there. You can get it to a 1:1. You can also take another lens that has a 3 foot focus, put an extension tube on it, and you might get it down to 1 foot. Add another extension tube to it, and you might get it down to 1/2 foot. Add another one, and you might take your non-macro 85mm lens and get it to where you can focus within 2 inches. Extension tubes can do that. You can stack them. This is a 35mm, this is a 20mm, and this is a 12mm. And what that really means is that is the distance that it's adding to the lens barrel. So if you want to see an example of what this can do, using the A7R Mark II, we'll put all 3 of these on here, and we'll put the 24-105 on here. Now this looks positively silly. Actually, it looks kind of like that telephoto on ET. We won't get into that. So let's look at what this actually does. So the first picture, this is all 3 of the extension tubes at 105mm, macro, close focus, and it's fit to a 16:9 frame. Now this next photo is where it's cropped to actual pixel size. Now all of a sudden you've taken this 24-105 and you've turned it into a reasonable, if not respectable, macro lens. So don't get too discouraged about having the perfect macro lens, because there isn't one. It's all about the right tool for the job. So one quick thing before we close out, have you seen the movie The Greatest Showman? If you haven't, I really recommend you go see it. I am not much for musicals, and I loved this movie. In fact, I've seen it now 3 times, and it's amazing. You will leave there in a much happier place than when you started. So if you haven't seen it, go see it. I'm not going to do picks every week, although I might, because I do have the movie pass. But I just wanted to share that with you because I thought you might care. And as always, if you have any questions, do feel free to put those in the comments below. I do read all these comments and I try to respond to each and every one of them, even if it's just to say thank you. Give me a thumbs up, click that subscribe button. I would really appreciate it. Also, you can click that little alert bell next to the subscribe, and that'll let you know every time I upload a video, because you do want to know, right? Also, feel free to tell all your friends about my channel, because this is filmmaking, this is photography, this is how-to, this is all kinds of stuff. And I really want to make a nice community out there. Also, put a comment down below if you happen to see The Greatest Showman and what you thought of it, because I also care about that. So this is Scott Balkum from Imagination Creation Films, and I like to close it out with a saying: don't let your life lead your passions, let your passions lead your life.